Hello. Welcome to the online training series on sustainable food in tourism, brought to you by the One Planet Sustainable Tourism Program, UNWTO, and Futouris. Thank you all very much for your interest and for connecting. This first session is on the fundamentals of the sustainable management of food. I am Virginia Fernandez-Trapa, Program Officer at the Sustainable Development of Tourism Department in UNWTO, and it's my pleasure to be facilitating this session today. We will start with opening remarks from our Director of the Sustainable Development of Tourism Department, Dr. Dirk Glaeser. Then we will introduce the joint program on sustainable food, where we are collaborating with other UN agencies and which provides the context for the implementation of these trainings. And we will then move on into the actual training on the fundamentals to understand why we need to manage food sustainably, what's it about, and how can we do it. The last part of today's session of 1 hour will hopefully be devoted to a questions and answers session. Please note that your mics and cameras are disabled, as this is a series of trainings, so slightly different to the interactive webinars with panels and many speakers that we also organize. We nevertheless welcome your questions via chat throughout the session. Please try to indicate who is asking the question, which organization, when you type it, or otherwise use the right click of the mouse to rename yourself in Zoom so as to show your organization followed by your name. We will try to address as many of the questions during the Q&A. Please note that the session is being recorded. If you stay with us, we assume that we have your consent, as this video will be later posted in our website and disseminated. So without further ado, I will now hand over to our director, Dr. Dirk Glaeser, for his welcome remarks. Dirk.
Thank you, Virginia, very much for the introduction, and welcome everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are. This is the very first in a series of webinars dedicated to food waste. And as most of you know, that UNWTO is strongly committed to accelerate sustainable consumption production patterns in the tourism sector. Circularity in the tourism value chain plays a very important, therefore, role. We have identified two main entry points, which are being addressed through the work, as Virginia just stressed, of the One Planet Sustainable Tourism Program: plastics and food. Food is one of the basic necessities of life, not only for humans, but the way most food is produced for humans is the single biggest threat to nature today, leading to biodiversity loss and deforestation, overfishing, to name a few. Estimates point at that 1/3 of food produced globally is waste, and this represents 30% of global greenhouse gas emissions. Food waste estimates for hotels and restaurants suggest even higher rates for the sector. This is why SDG target 12.3 was inserted in the 2030, and the target reads, I quote, by 2030, half per capita global food waste at the retail and consumer levels, and reduce food losses along production and supply chains, including post-harvest losses. We urgently need to enhance the contribution of the tourism sector to the achievements of SDG 12.3. This can happen at many stages of the food value chain, but not all of them with the same intensity. For example, we can influence food production with the procurement choices of food-related transport, yet the impact of our sector in the area is lesser than in food service. It is in food service consumption and disposal that we have as a sector a main role to play. We therefore promote collaborative and concerted efforts to reduce food waste. We need to transition to more sustainable management of food. Through this training series, we will be discussing the various aspects of sustainable food consumption. We will start today with an overview of the fundamentals. We hope to better support understanding and management of food in a holistic, sustainable way to ensure the future success of tourism business in this endeavor. I thank you very much for connecting. I also thank Virginia and Roxana for all the efforts of making our regular webinars happening so smoothly, and this one in particular, just after returning from COP27. I wish you all a fruitful training session and hope to see you soon in the next editions of this training series. Virginia, over.
Thank you so much, Dirk, for the welcome remarks and for your kind words. Today's session is actually part of the deliverables of a joint program titled Promoting Sustainable Food Consumption and Production Patterns through Integrated Tools, Advocacy, and Multi-Stakeholder Action. Such a long title, which actually is a program supported by the Multi-Partner Trust Fund for SDG 12. This fund is connected to the activities of the One Planet Network. As you know, the One Planet Network is a network with a mandate from the United Nations General Assembly to support the implementation of SDG 12 and related goals. So within this program, we are collaborating with UNEP, with FAO, with UNDP, and the program has two major components. The first one is aimed at supporting governments to tackle food systems issues like knowledge and understanding of food systems, collaboration across levels of government, lack of coherence in policy areas, etc., which is mainly led by the colleagues in our sister agencies. There's also a second component to support the link between tourism and food sectors, which is led by UNWTO. As you know, food is a key element of the tourism experience, and it is a differentiating element for tourism destinations. As Dirk said, it represents an entry point for circularity, enhancing the connection with local supply chains and minimizing food waste. It also represents an entry point for the transformation of tourism operations through sustainable procurement, sustainable menus, sustainable consumption, food waste reduction. And lastly, it also represents a climate action strategy, a very important one actually that connects very well with the work that we are doing under the Glasgow Declaration on Climate Action in Tourism. As part of the activities of this joint program, we have enabled a repository of tools and resources related to the sustainable management of food. In this repository, accessible through the QR on the slide, you can find toolkits on food waste reduction in hospitality and food service. You can find guidelines on the sustainable management of food in tourism. You can find awareness raising and training materials. And among those, you can also find the Sustainable Food Manual published by Futouris, which appears also on the slide, which happens to be our partner for this online training series. So the content of today is based on this manual. Futouris, for those of you who don't know them, is a German NGO. Actually, Futouris is the sustainability initiative of the German travel industry. Its members are tour operators, hotels, destinations, which stand for preserving the heritage of holiday destinations and developing a sustainable future for the travel industry. They have extensive experience implementing research and projects on sustainable food, including projects on hotels and cruise lines. So in today's training, you'll get an overview of what is meant by sustainable food and what sustainability aspects should tourism companies consider when creating a sustainable menu, for example. You will also learn what consumers think about sustainable food and get some examples of what companies can do to achieve more sustainability in food production. We will also have 3 subsequent training sessions on other topics like food sourcing, food presentation and communication, waste management, and etc. So we hope to see you there as well. And I now leave you in the good hands of our trainer. She's Professor Dagmar Lund-Durlacher. Dagmar is Professor of Tourism Management and currently works at the University for Sustainable Development, Eberswalde in Germany, and at the Institute for Sustainability in Tourism in Vienna, Austria. She's the author of numerous scientific publications in the fields of corporate social responsibility, tourism and climate change, and sustainable food. And together with Futouris, she has conducted a number of research projects. So Dagmar, the floor is yours now for the training. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Virginia, for the introduction, and hello and good afternoon. It's a great pleasure for me to be here and to share some of the insights about this important topic with you. And today, as you heard, we will talk about the fundamentals of sustainable food. So why is this topic of sustainable food such a major concern for us? One reason is the ever and rapidly growing demand for food. We expect the world's population to grow to over 9 billion by 2050, and we need therefore to be very careful with our resources, especially with food. At the same time, food producers around the world often do not get a fair share of global food trade, and in many instances work under poor working conditions. There's another pressure on food, and that's the pressure on the environment. This pressure comes mainly from greenhouse gas emissions caused by food production, which play, as you know, a crucial role in the climate crisis we currently face. And also other environmental issues such as water scarcity and the loss of biodiversity have a major impact on our environment. Then also the health aspect of food is an important and growing issue, especially in our modern society where food allergies and various dietary plans play an increasing important role. And when we talk about cultures or think about cultures, in many countries, there are rapid socio-cultural changes taking place. And this also raises the question of how we can protect local food cultures and traditions. So these are all concerns we have at the moment, and which are important concerns when we talk about food. But on the other hand, for most tourists, food consumption is an important part of their holidays. Eating local food, authentic food, can enhance their vacation experience. And through sustainable food consumption, they also can contribute to the conservation of a destination's environmental, social, and cultural resources. So all these are very good reasons why the tourism industry has an important role to play. And on the one hand, in developing a more sustainable food offer, and on the other, also changing the way guests consume food. So the next slide, please. So what is sustainable food all about? We have done comprehensive research on this topic, and we have defined 5 dimensions of food sustainability. These are the 3 traditional sustainability dimensions, which you all might know: ecology, economy, and society. But for food, we have 2 more dimensions, which we have identified, and these are health and culture. And now in the following, I will talk about these dimensions in more detail. So next slide, please. Yeah, so first, the economic dimension. So for the economic dimension, the goal is to achieve higher resource efficiency on the one side in food production, but also to increase the local value added in the community or tourist destination. So sustainable food policy has to be as resource efficient as possible. And when we talk about resource efficiency, we must pay attention to energy efficiency, to greenhouse gas emissions, and water consumption in food production. A sustainable food policy also means optimizing the food supply chain. So, for example, by shortening transport distances or the length of storage of food. Also, the reduction of food waste is a top priority, as it saves not only resources, but also money. Again, here our research has shown that 20 to 60% of food purchased in the hospitality industry ends up in the trash. And I will provide an example shortly, which shows how businesses can actually reduce this waste effectively. When we talk about the economic dimension, we must also consider the local community, which should benefit from tourism. So tourism businesses should source their food locally and thus add value and create jobs in the community. So this is a very important aspect when we talk about the economic dimension. In our studies, it was also confirmed that travelers are willing to pay more for a sustainable food offer, which has, of course, a positive impact on the income of tourism businesses. And this is also an aspect in the economic dimension. So next slide, please. So now, as announced earlier, I want to give you a positive example of how hotels have reduced the food waste and also reduced their cost with that. This project was carried out by Futouris in cooperation with United Against Waste and 10 hotels in Greece and Spain. And the aim of this project was to lower food waste in the hotel restaurants. So the project started with monitoring and analyzing the food waste in the restaurants and to get an idea where the food was occurring. So after this analysis, training session with kitchen and service staff took place, and they have implemented 3 measures for food waste reduction in their food operations. Measures like to put out smaller containers and plates on the buffet, to use live cooking stations on the buffet, also to better communicate between service and kitchen staff, where the service staff then communicated on a regular basis about occupancy rates in the restaurants during buffet times, for example. And also the guests were informed about the waste reduction measures. And as you can see here, that numbers, the results were quite convincing because the participating hotels have reduced the food waste in the summer season where the project took place by 25 to 30%. And this also led to significant cost reductions. Next slide, please. Yeah, to this topic, I also would like to bring the guest's perspective to waste and waste management. In our studies, we have also conducted a survey about food consumption behavior on holidays with more than 7,000 German package travelers. And one of the results is that tourists accept smaller portions of food if it contributes to waste reduction. So it's an accepted policy also by guests, and introducing food waste reduction measures is definitely something which is supported by the guests if done in the right way. So next slide, please. Okay, now we are moving to the ecological dimension. The goal here is to maintain a healthy ecosystem and low environmental impacts. And the crucial ecological aspects are reducing the CO2 emissions, or the greenhouse gas emissions actually, and the water footprint, and to support to biodiversity and animal welfare. So one of the most important environmental impacts of food is its contribution to greenhouse gas emissions, and many of you might not be aware of that. Greenhouse gas emissions of food items depends heavily on the mode and distance of transport of food. So for example, if food is transported by air freight from overseas or by ships, the methods used in food production. So for example, buying vegetables which are produced in greenhouses, which are heated with fossil fuels, versus seasonal local fruit, and the food item itself. And talking about food items, we have one major issue, and that is meat. As you can see here, beef production requires 20 times more land and emits 20 times more greenhouse gas emissions than producing plant-based proteins. Yeah, why is beef production so greenhouse gas intensive? It's because of the methane gas produced by cattle, which is 25 times more climate damaging than CO2. So with this, hotels have and restaurants have a significant influence on reducing greenhouse gas emissions through their food choices. If they decide for a climate-friendly procurement policy, so for example, to increase the use of vegetables and grains and have less meat on the menu, this would lead to considerable savings in greenhouse gas emissions. Next slide. Yeah, food is also by far the most important factor in water consumption in tourism businesses, not the swimming pool and wellness areas. So they account for an estimated 85% of total water consumption. Also here, beef has almost 50 times higher water footprint than vegetables. Yeah, why is that the case? The large amounts of water required for the production of meat and dairy products result from the fact that animals consume, or cattle consume, large amounts of plants, and thereby they indirectly absorb large amounts of water during their lives. Vegetable and fruit plants, of course, also absorb certain amounts of water during their growth, but not as much as is needed for the meat production. So reducing the share of meat and dairy products not only reduces the greenhouse gas emissions, but also is very important for reducing the water demand. Next slide, please. Yeah, the loss of biodiversity, we know all, is accelerating worldwide. There are estimates that 23% of global land area is degraded. More than 85% of wetlands have disappeared since 1970, and forests were lost in the tropics. These are really shocking facts, and it doesn't look better in the ocean. 61% of the world's marine fish stocks are exploited, 29% are overfished. And if we are not taking action, it is reported that some 1 million animal and plant species are threatened with extinction. So this is alarming, and we need to take some action. So we need to support biodiversity by protecting endangered species and also support animal welfare. And without reforming our food system, this biodiversity loss will continue to accelerate. We need to shift to a diet which consists of many plant products, because animal farming has a much greater negative impact on biodiversity than plants. Also, more land needs to be protected, and agriculture needs to become more nature-friendly, which means to limit the use of chemicals and pesticides, and also replacing monocultures with polycultures. And another important thing, buying organic products, because this supports biodiversity as well. The main principle of organic agriculture are low use of energy, which is, for example, needed for the production of fertilizers and chemicals, and the use of natural self-regulating mechanisms like crop rotation. So to have closed resource circles and to nurture the soil instead of the plant. It also means to use less fertilizers and pesticides, and using more natural plant protectants. So buying organic food, it's an important topic for the food service industry, because it not only means protecting or supporting the biodiversity, it also means that organic products benefits the tourists and the local communities, because organic products are often healthier than conventional products, because they have not been treated with fertilizers and chemical protectants. And another benefit is that organic production is more labor intensive and creates more jobs than conventional farming, and is more safe for farm workers, because farm workers on conventional farms are often affected by the use of pesticides and other toxins. And we see serious diseases in farmers exposed to toxic sprays. So organic farming means that workers can experience a healthier working environment. Next slide, please. Yeah, from a societal perspective, food should be accessible to all. A sustainable food policy has to be inclusive. This means that tourism businesses should cooperate and source their food from small-scale local producers and suppliers so that they also can benefit from tourism. And also fair working conditions such as fair wages, safe working conditions have to be considered. Often also small farmers do not possess enough power to negotiate acceptable prices for their products. And this is where the concept of fair trade comes into play, which secures better trading conditions and rights for marginalized workers and producers. And the World Fair Trade Organization has introduced a fair trade standard and a label, which you can see on the right, which assures fair trade practices for products with this label. Next slide, please. Also here, when we take a look at the traveler's perspective, again from our survey with German package tourists, ecological and social standards are also important to travelers. Our survey showed that travelers want that travel companies should not only meet but exceed ecological and social standards in their operations. So it's something what the travelers also demand from the tourism industry. Next slide, please. Now we move to the cultural dimension, which is also a very important sustainability dimension in the context of food, because the cultural dimension means to safeguard food traditions, which might disappear in one or the other region, and to strengthen the regional identity of staff and local population. And by sourcing and producing typical local food, by using typical preparation methods, tourism businesses can help to protect the local food cultures and support also local producers. And the next slide, please. And when it comes to food cultures, this local authentic food is really an important topic for the tourists. Tourists consider authentic local food as a good way to get to know the local culture. And also a large proportion of tourists prefer to eat local food on vacation, because local, traditional, authentic food can enhance their travel experiences, and so they should really be part of the holiday offer. Next slide, please. Yeah, to this topic, culture and food, I would like to present another nice example, which was carried out by Futouris and TUI Care Foundation. It is the project Taste Crete, and this project promotes local food cultures by linking local food producers and tourism businesses. So the situation in Crete was that both olive oil and wine play an important role in Crete's economy and culture. However, there were conventional cultivation methods used, which led to environmental pollution and a rather average product quality. On the other hand, tourists expect to find these typical regional dishes during their vacation in Crete. So the project lasted for 3 years, and during these 3 years, local farmers have been trained on sustainable farming practices and were connected to the local tourism industry. And also the representatives of the participating hotels were trained on sustainable food cultivation, especially in regards to Cretan specialties, and they also learned how to promote such local products to the guests. So with these trainings, farmers and hoteliers learned a lots about Crete's food tradition and Crete's food culture. Yeah, as a result, the participating hotels have developed various activities to promote local and sustainable food to their guests, and this was done with great success. So, for example, they did wine and olive tastings, olive oil tastings, sorry. They offered cooking classes, they offered Greek products in the hotel, and much more. So this is really a very nice example how tourism businesses can support local food cultures and can strengthen the local supply chains. Next slide, please. So this is the last dimension, it's the health dimension, which means that sustainable food should contribute to human health and prevent foodborne diseases while on holidays, while tourists are on holidays. In this context, the share of fresh food instead of convenience products is a big topic and should be increased, not only because guests value it, but because it is also healthier. To prepare fresh food offers a number of advantages, because fresh food contains less fat, less salt and sugar than convenience food. Cooking with fresh ingredients also makes it easier to prepare a wider variety of dishes. The taste of freshly prepared meals is different and more unique. And also, different studies show that freshly prepared meals are more cost efficient. Also, seasonal food is healthier. Studies show that the total vitamin C, for example, vitamin C content of red peppers, tomatoes, papayas is higher when these crops are picked ripe from the plant, when they are in season, because the nutritional quality is not improving after they have been harvested. The color might develop, but not the nutritional quality of fruits and vegetables. So the health aspect is in particular, the health aspect in particular, the freshly prepared food is very important to the guests. And I want to underline that again with survey results. So the next slide, please. Yeah, freshly prepared food was the most important factor for German package holiday travelers when we asked them what is important in regard to food. So almost all package travelers stated that they would like or that they prefer freshly prepared food without any finished products during their vacation. So definitely an area tourism businesses should pay attention to. The next slide, please.
Dagmar, if you allow me to jump in really quick, I just wanted to make a short break to remind our participants that they can already start preparing their questions for the chat. So yes. that's all from my side. Surprise. Thank you.
Virginia.
Please continue.
Yeah, I'm almost at the end actually, because this slide shows where and how businesses can start with their sustainability, with their sustainable operation, or introducing sustainability into their food operations. We heard a lot now about sustainability dimensions of food and what issues we have to address in order to develop a sustainable food offer. Now, this graph shows you where and how tourism businesses can start. So they can actually do something in the 4 phases of their food production. You see here the procurement, the preparation of food in the kitchen, the food presentation of the food on the menu or the buffet, and by influencing also the guests in their food consumption. In addition, it's they can of course improve sustainability by waste management, also paying attention to the working conditions for employees and their engagement for society. These are also important areas that need to be considered when businesses are developing a sustainable food offer. So to mention here, with all these areas, businesses can actually step in and create a more sustainable offer. It is important to maintain a holistic view of food production and to look at the relationships between these phases, because you have to somehow assure that you have a sustainable balance of your food offer. For example, a product can have a high degree of sustainability when purchased, but creates a lot of food waste when prepared, consumed. So we need to take like this system level perspective to not have create a silo effect and only look at one of these production stages. Yeah, so now these different stages in the food production are now linked to our trainings. In the forthcoming trainings, we will discuss these areas, and we will also show solution approaches for food services to become more sustainable. So the next training will be dedicated to sustainable food procurement. And we will discuss how to create climate and biodiversity friendly menus. We will discuss how to overcome the hurdles of buying local and seasonal food products. And we will also dive deeper into the topic of organic and fair trade food. So this will be training 2. In training 3, we will focus on designing and presenting sustainable menus and how to involve the guests to ensure sustainable food consumption. So it's about how to set up the buffet to stimulate guests for a more sustainable behavior, sustainable food consumption behavior, and how to present your food in a sustainable way. Training 4 will then provide insights into the very important topic of waste management, which starts with food waste measurement and monitoring, and then present solutions for waste reduction. And then there will be a 5th training. So there will be a 5th training in Spanish held for our Spanish community. So the next slide, please, because this sums up my presentation. Yeah, here you see the dates for these 5 trainings, and with this overview, what is coming next, I will close my presentation, and I'm looking forward to your questions.
Dagmar, thank you so much for such a comprehensive presentation. You know, it's actually quite nice to have the time to go through a topic in detail. Normally, we're used to having crowded panels where at the end of the day, we don't necessarily deal with topics in depth. So thank you so much for bringing the fundamentals closer to us. I have received 2 questions through direct chat. So I think we will start with those. And then I see also there is a question on the chat. Please, colleagues, continue posting the questions, and we will be sharing them with Dagmar during this Q&A session. Dagmar, the first question is about beef, actually, that you had highlighted. It says you mentioned beef as a food that should be rarely represented on the menu anymore. Mm. What about the other types of meat? Are they also as harmful to the environment as beef?
Beef is definitely the most harmful product or meat product. But also, of course, the other meat like pork and chicken are are more greenhouse gas intensive than vegetables, for example. Yeah, most vegetables, I have to say, but they are much less greenhouse gas intensive than beef. Yeah, so a pork, for example, a third of the beef greenhouse gas footprint. So this
Okay.
is definitely preferable to then put, poultry or pork on the menu instead of beef.
Okay, very, very
I mean,
insightful.
it's also what is important maybe to mention, yeah, and not everyone might know that. Yeah, it is also very important to look where the beef comes from. Yeah? So, and how the beef is produced. So, for example, imported beef from South America or beef from South America where tropical forests were burned down, yeah, to feed the cattle, have a very high greenhouse gas intensity because the forests are lost for compensating CO2. On the other hand, cattle raised on grassland has a much lower greenhouse gas footprint. But again, also cattle raised on grassland and feed it with soy, for example, blended and imported from South America, is again, worsening the greenhouse gas balance. So you really have to understand these relations, and then look, at the greenhouse gas emissions of a product. So it's not that easy to answer.
Thank you, Dagmar. No, definitely anything related to greenhouse gas emissions is quite complex, but I think already by enhancing our understanding of the first choices we need to make, we're advancing in a good direction. And as everything in life, it's a process. So the more of these good choices that you make, the more you understand the implications and will be able to improve over time. So let's move on to the second question, Dagmar. This is the one on the chat. David Randall posted it, and he's asking for an example. If you happen to have an example, he says, would you share some best practices of using renewable energy for food production at farms that in turn have partnerships with tourism restaurants to promote a circular economy?
That's a very good question. Yeah, that are definitely farms are really good good businesses to promote renewable energy. Yeah, because they produce actually they with their the waste they are also producing. Yeah, they could produce their own energy, and I know in Austria there are some examples of farms which are doing that. Of course, yeah. Can you just I just have to see the whole question again. Yeah. I don't know what you actually mean. It's maybe the food waste of rest is that I'm just thinking about the question again. Yeah, maybe the food waste of restaurants, which then goes into farm production. Yeah, I think that is what is meant by this question, and we have some examples about that. Yeah, I know about in Cuba, for example, but it is very much a matter of legal restrictions. Yeah, how food from restaurants can be used, or food waste from restaurants can be used to, for example, for feeding animals and go into food productions in farms, and you have to be very careful of what kind of food waste you really bring to the farms. I know from one example that it is really quite a tricky method to have a good food waste separation method, yeah, because you only can bring certain foods to feed animals on a farm. And so you have again to train the personnel and staff in the hotels to really do this separation of food waste in the right way so that it can be reused as feeding for the farms. So I don't know if this answers the question.
I think so, Dagmar. Thank you very much. And yes, indeed, the regulations for animal feed are so varied that it's difficult to get a global picture at one go.
Exactly. Yeah.
You know, I think that there's important to keep in mind is the link with the destination when we are trying to pilot these circular approaches as a tourism businesses to really understand the context in which we are in and what is allowed and what is not allowed.
Exactly.
From my side, I know about an initiative in Machu Picchu, actually in Peru, where hoteliers are using the food waste, notably cooking oils, to create biochar. You know, this is a very powerful fertilizer. And then they use it to, again, grow produce that is once more used in the tourism industry. So that's quite an initiative, quite an interesting circular initiative. In any case, if you have examples, also question back to you, to the whole group, you know, share them with us. We can put them in the repository and make that repository a place where to go when we want to find those examples. So don't hesitate to share.
What is a very good example too is this is also in urban destinations, that mushroom factories are actually collecting the coffee, you know, the coffee grounds, and then plant the mushrooms on that. This is a very good business, and then they sell the mushrooms back to the restaurants. So that works really good as a business concept as well. Got very popular here in Austria, for example.
Thank you, Dagmar. We also have a question from Lucas Labo. He's asking if there is a tool that we recommend to calculate the emissions of a portion, for example, 1 kilo of beef.
Yes, there are tools available, and I will present them in the next training session. There are also websites, you know, which present these different tools, and next time I will present these tools. They are very helpful to calculate the CO2 emissions of your meal, for example, of a whole meal. But again, here it's very context specific, because again, it depends, you know, on the data you have and on, you know, the greenhouse gas emissions of the food which are in the database. So it's really destination specific again, or region specific.
Thank you, Dagmar.
But I think in this context, it's very important, you know, not to adhere so much to the absolute figures of the CO2 emissions, but really see, you know, the relations of the different food categories, because that stays the same. So beef is always much more CO2 emission intensive than vegetables or some fruits and so on. So this is everywhere the same, even so we have different numbers for different countries and regions.
Exactly. And also let's not get deterred by the fact of not being able to measure the implications in greenhouse gas emissions of a certain food to take action. We can start with changes in practice and in parallel try to measure so that we trigger action as soon as possible. Dagmar, I also see that some colleagues are asking where they can get the materials, how can they get the materials for other sessions that they may not be able to attend. Colleagues, everything is going to be posted online. Yes, my colleague Roxana has just dropped the link there on the chat where you will find all the materials as we go. So if you can attend, we are really happy to welcome you to the next sessions. If not, you can find everything on that website. I see that we have a few more questions. Let's see. I will go for one on food waste, Dagmar. It says the amounts of waste you have mentioned are huge. Where do these large quantities of food waste arise?
It arises mainly through overproduction. Because it's too much food is produced for the buffet or for, you know, the evening menus. So it's almost half of the food waste occurs through overproduction. but then also plate leftovers. So the guests are not consuming the food they have taken. It's a third about, which are plate leftovers. And then it's production waste. It's the other bigger factor, which, this is waste. Sometimes it's not avoidable. Sometimes it's food is wasted in the kitchen, in the production. So there can be measures taken not to waste so much, not to waste so much food in the kitchen. Another, but this is has a smaller importance, is the stock expiration, so that that food expires and is not consumed before it expires. So these are the 4 areas, but the most important one, the most significant one, is overproduction.
Okay, the next question is posted from Bali. Putungura says, it is sometimes pretty hard to access the more sustainable option on the food, especially organic food that are certified with fair trade, since it is a lot more expensive than normal produce. How can we tackle this issue? Is procuring from a local source the solution, even if the local supplier doesn't apply organic methods?
Yeah, that's a big question. Yeah, I mean, organic products are sometimes, actually, they are quite often more expensive than conventional food. And I always say, having this question is, you should start with the more inexpensive products, not with the expensive products like organic beef or whatever, but start with grains or so in an organic quality. And to your question, I know that to get a certification, this is expensive and needs a lot of resources. And so many farmers do not apply for this certification. And it does not mean that local farmers are not producing in an organic way. In many regions, the farmers produce organic, but do not have the certification. So if you know that, you still buy organic food. Regional food is really different. Regional food can be organic, but also can't be organic. So you can't label it as an organic product if you don't know how it is really produced. So you have to be careful in that. But there are often in rural destinations, especially, there are often producers which produce their products in an organic way, or adhering to the organic standards, but are not labeled with an organic label and certification.
That's very right. We also have Dominica. She was asking about the mushroom planting company, and Roxana is also posting a chat to another repository that we have, which is more focused on circularity, and where we have some solutions mentioned. One of them is the mushroom example. It's not the only company which is doing the example, but there you can find some information. Then we have Marnus from Tuvalu Private Game Reserve in South Africa, asking if there is a local champion they can reach out to do an assessment on their food waste. He says they are situated in a semi-arid desert and will have a bigger impact than other. I think this is basically a question for even the group, right, Dagmar?
Yes, I can't answer that.
Yeah, I mean, we have some contacts of experts. Marnus, happy to take that to a private discussion if you need help. Not sure they are working on South Africa, but we can definitely check. And if everyone has a suggestion to help Marcus, please go ahead. This is all about networking at the end of the day. Rose Trebuchet, she's asking from the World Food Travel Association, Dagmar. She says, some people say that beef production helps maintain natural areas that cannot be exploited by humans, or reduce waste of cereals unsuitable for humans. what could we replace beef production with to continue to meet the 2 elements listed above. So basically, if we are not consuming so much food, then what do we replace beef production with so that we can still maintain these natural areas?
Other animals maybe, like sheep and goats and so on, they have a lesser greenhouse gas, or they produce lesser greenhouse gas emissions. So that could be one way, but I know it's an important topic that animals are also used for keeping the landscape, in many regions. Also here in Austria, where we are based, the mountains would look very different if we wouldn't have the sheep and goats and the cattle to take care of this land. But as I said, also beef production has to be viewed very carefully, like cattle, which is fed by grass and grass produces or has a lesser impact than beef, which is imported and where rainforest had to be taken down. So we do not advocate for abandoning beef, but to just reduce the share of beef, which has grown tremendously in the last years.
Exactly. This is, I guess, the elephant in the room when we speak about food, right, Dagmar, is comparable to discussions we have on aviation when we speak about climate. But let's remember, colleagues, that, and Dirk was mentioning this in his welcoming remarks, that along the food value chain, there is, of course, food production, but there is also food service, and there is food consumption, and there is waste. And tourism, our main impact, what we can really influence as a service, mainly influence to have a larger impact, is everything that connects with food service. So how we procure the food in our businesses, how we prepare the food, how we talk to the guests, how we reduce food waste. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying we should not look at food production. We can influence it through procurement, but to a certain extent, meaning our recommendation is to prioritize our work on food service, that we really make it round, we take holistic approaches, and in that way make a difference, which in addition is also a very good opportunity for cost saving and competitiveness of tourism businesses. I don't think we have any more questions, Dagmar. Thank you so much. I think we are gonna then close, if you agree.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
And thanks to all that shared also examples on the chat. We will keep those, and please register to the next session. We really look forward to seeing you there. You have the QR code now on the slide, just in case you were having issues finding where to register. So the next one is 2 days from now. Thank you so much, everyone. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you. See you soon. Bye.
Thank you,
Dagmar.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.